as a technology guy, I look at that person and go, if we're at the point where ChatGPT is capable of lying to you, then we're in the timeline where we saw Terminator in theaters and now we've seen Skynet happen in real life.
Solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Post-Military Podcast, the podcast where we give you stories and advice to better prepare for the next transition in your life. And stay with me is Dan Horgan. Dan, thanks so much for coming on.
Billy, thanks for having me. Yeah, for sure.
If you're watching this episode on LinkedIn, Dan's a pretty familiar face in the military veteran community, especially on LinkedIn. You might recognize him from his posts on everything from coffee to beer to archery. So
and I'm sorry, but yeah, and then now doing some chat GPT, some AI.
You're an AI guy now. I saw that. I'm enjoying the AI content quite a bit as a cyber security consultant myself. It's cool to see how people are implementing this like crazy technology in spaces and industries that some might not consider like highly technical. But as someone who's developing a podcast now, I can tell you that the marketing world is full of tools, just like the cybersecurity world. So I'm sure you can speak to that very, very, very well. But let's kick things off. Dan, please tell the listeners, line out your military career for us so we know where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm the old guy. It's pretty diverse. I mean, I literally went into basic training a month after Desert Storm. So the Desert Storm, so 1991. So February of 91, I was in basic training. And so for those, Desert Storm kicked off, in January of pretty much of 91. So yeah, I was in basic training when that happened. Anyway, I was I was a security police specialist and I was in there and down here in Texas going through my tech school. And then the Presidential Honor Guard came down with a recruiting trip and I'm from Baltimore. So I was like, yes. So raised my hand. I did that for about 2 years as a special duty assignment. So Presidential Honor Guard in DC, said I did such a great job that I get to pick where I want to go. So I got to pick it between Wyoming or Minot. I didn't know anything. So I why not choose in Minot? So I spent about another 2 or 3 years in Minot, North Dakota as a fire team. Why not Minot? Yeah. As a fire team cop, doing the missile fields out in Minot. Cross-trained, did some AWACS. So I cross-trained the AWACS. So then I flew in AWACS for about 4 years. Was called a scope dope. I was an air surveillance technician.
I worked at Tinker at the Air Control Network Squadron out there. So
there you go. Yeah.
Very familiar with the platform.
I was 963rd AWACS.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so 963rd guys, it was great. That's kind of when my career kind of took a little bit of a turn. So I then applied to be a TI, got accepted. The government and military being what it is said, hey, you're chronic critical. We can't let you go be a TI. And I was like, I was so mad. Anyway, so I ended up getting out, but the Air Force knew total force was a thing. So I ended up being in the reserves. So I literally stayed in the reserves. 9/11 happened, back on active duty, down to the Andrews Air Force Base. Went to Raven School, became a Raven in 2002. So I'm Raven 889. That was cool. But I worked with a lot of cops. And so being in the reserve, that's kind of what I got my law enforcement bug really kicked in. So that's where I became a Baltimore City cop, 2003 to 2010 when I was in the reserves. But then I was just doing a lot of good stuff. And so that's kind of where my career not ended, but really picked up. And I say I did the job that I love the most in the military. So I ended up becoming a TACP. So I was a JTAC from 2007 to 2016. And so I retired from the Oklahoma Air Guard. So I touched active duty, reserves, and guard. So my retirement actually is from the Oklahoma Air Guard. But I have enough active duty time where it'll be an active duty retirement pretty much just when I turn 58, which again, I'm old enough. It's not too far off.
Well, see, I don't want to make you feel super old, but I was born 3 years after you joined basic training. So
Oh, so I have a
So
daughter, and I'm not that I'm not proud. My ex-wife is great, but I have a daughter from my military marriage, Sarah. Yes, my daughter's 28. Yeah, she's born in 95. She's born in,
yep,
yep.
the frozen north. So
Yeah.
that's
Well, her social
dang.
security number, right, it's got, I couldn't even say what her social security number is, but I know it's like some number I've never seen. And you like, I know what, like Maryland's like 215 or 21, whatever. Yeah. My
Yeah.
daughter, I'm sure if people see her social, like, where's that from? Yeah. And she's like, I was born in North Dakota.
Somewhere out in the boons.
Yeah.
So you did, so you went all the way up to AWACS, got
Yep.
out, joined the reserves. While you
Yep.
were in the reserves, you were in the Baltimore PD.
Mhm.
Then 9/11 happens. And so did you voluntarily go back on to active duty, or did they just say, hey, it's time to rock, war on terror's on?
Yeah. This is one of the stories that I really don't ever talk about, which is fine if it's not anything bad, but like, no, so I'm in the reserves. It's just one of these, I don't know. It's just short story. So I actually worked for a bank called MB&A America. So MB&A now is, I think, owned by Bank of America, but they held all like the credit cards. Like if you had a NASCAR or like a Bass Pro, probably, Visa or MasterCard. Yeah. So got hired as, I did collections. So I went from all the way from 30-day to charge off. And I'll tell you, so that's my 9/11 story. I mean, I know we got time. I was in the charge off division. So you haven't paid your credit card in 6 months. I was on the phone, with a woman, who hadn't paid her credit card in 6 months. And I was, trying to, it's not just, hey, give me a check. You actually have a lot of programs, believe it or not, right? Like, hey, what can we do? Right. And you try to work with them. And she literally said to me, like, hey, I'm watching the news and oh my God, like a plane hit, and I was at that point, like, I know I've heard enough. You're like, okay, I get it. Let's get your checkbook. Let's get you back, but we had TVs up in our office. Next thing you know, we were all watching it. And we actually got let go, by noon that day. Yeah. So I was working for MBNA and that happened. And then I actually got my lending authority. So that's so that's September. Right at the end of September, I got my lending authority and I actually moved over to be a credit analyst. So now I had my lending authority approved up to $15,000, which was a whole test and stuff. So I'm sitting here and I'm approving credit applications up to 15K. Yeah. And so that's September, right? October happens. Like 1 November, I get the call. You need to come. So I was security forces down at Andrews. They're like, you need to come and report. And I'm like, mm-mm, mm-mm. I was like I was literally sitting at my desk and I'm like, no, like, what do you mean? I mean, you want to do it for a country, right? But I was just like, like at that point I already had like, I did 10 years, almost 9.5, like active duty. I'm in the reserves. Like, and I'm like, what? No, career's going. And I'm like, no, what? And, they're like, yeah. So I stayed on active duty orders for 13 months. It's a little over a year, down at Andrews working. I think we were on 12s and we were working like, 3 days on or whatever the schedule crazy was. So I had to live down there. So it was about an hour from my house or so. So I lived down there for like the 3 days and then went home for like whatever, 2 or 3 days and did that for a year. But a lot of guys and gals that I worked with were like Virginia state troopers or New Jersey trooper, or, my one partner, he was a DC cop. So that's kind of, again, when I say I got the bug, because we weren't deploying. We were at Andrews. I mean, Andrews is a pretty important base. We were at Andrews doing a lot of, the gates and, searching vehicles like every day. And so that's why, again, I went to Raven school. So I was like, I got to do something more. I gotta do something more. So I actually, went to Raven school in 2002. And then from there, yeah, I flew for that last year, like 2002, right when 2003, January, flew missions on the old C-141s down to South America.
Oh, that's cool. That's a really, really cool
Yeah,
mission.
Colombia, Peru, Chile, Bolivia.
Were you doing counter narc, or were you doing like foreign internal
So there's
defense or
supply. So yeah,
okay.
the Raven program. So back then, so it was, a lot of the cargo we had was a lot of like helicopter and military parts that we were taking down to South America. But those airfields, they're just, they still weren't, signed off. I don't know what the word would be, certified or whatever. So like, I mean, well, Colombia for one, like, I mean, it was, Bogota and Cartagena. like, so back in then, I remember doing anti-terrorism briefs to the air crew, and like the FARC were kidnapping everybody. Like your cousin was kidnapped yesterday. Like everyone was getting kidnapped. So yeah, no, we would literally land, and while they were unloading, you're standing out there like the cool guy Ravens. I don't want to make fun of the security forces guys. But I did that. Yeah. And like same thing with like Peru and Bolivia and Chile, but we would get there and you would do your assessment. And a lot of the airfields were secure. The military that were there, was reliable and stuff like that. So what you did is then you called back and you're like, hey, right, everything's A-okay. And they're like, great, button up the plane. And I mean, that was great. I ran like a 6K race, and you would think, why a 6K? I don't know different distances, but I ran a 6K race in Chile, downtown Chile. Had some play and pesos on me. And I saw people running in a park, and they spoke a little bit of English, and I paid them, and I ran a race in the park.
That's really cool. What was it like running at that altitude?
It was crazy. So, it wasn't Chile. I think it was, what was the one? I think it was Bolivia. Yeah. Cause or is it Peru? Where's Lake Titicaca?
I honestly
That,
have no idea.
so I always forget. So Lake Titicaca is like, I think it's the world's highest navigable lake.
Mhm.
And so when we landed, my partner and I, we stayed, and we got actually a little hypoxic. We weren't the altitude because you were high. And we could feel it. And so we were secure. We got buttoned up. We went downtown, and they took us, and they did our oxygen for the blood. And I think we were like at 88% or something, which isn't like, you're not dead, but I mean, it's
Not a fun
good.
time.
I think
Yeah.
you're supposed to be like 95. I don't know. Like I'm not a doctor,
Yeah.
but they're supposed to be like somewhere you're 90, high 90s. And we
High
were like in
90s.
our high 80s. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we went on a little oxygen mask for
So
so it was fun.
that's really cool. So you finish up your time as a Raven, and then do you go immediately into your TACP JTAC course, or is there time
Yeah, there was
between
a
those
little
two
bit
things?
of,
Okay.
yeah, Billy, it was a little bit of time. I was still messing around with the guard and kind of just
Mhm.
still drilling. Cause I didn't go. So I joined the 148th ASOS. I was the sixth guy into the unit. So like number 6.
Wow.
They took about being in a startup.
Yeah.
I was number 6, and that was up in Harrisburg area, Fort Indiantown Gap.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was 07.
So what was it? And so when you were doing your TACP time, were you like active like AGR, or was it a just a regular guard spot, or what was that like?
Yeah. In PA, I was just, a normal guard guy, just a traditional, nothing's ever just
Okay.
one weekend, but was your
Yeah.
traditional guard guy in Pennsylvania. But I left Pennsylvania in 2010, and that's when I left the Baltimore PD. My wife, she actually had enough of the Baltimore PD. She was like, all right, we're moving. So we actually moved back to Oklahoma. And that's actually, I landed an AGR job full time, at the Oklahoma ASOS, the 146.
Mhm. Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
That just stood up like a year prior. And so, so I got a slot, and I was AGR. So I was active duty, full time with those guys.
So when you got off of rewinding, you're in Oklahoma, you're working out of the AWACS, you apply to be a TI, they tell you to go kick rocks.
Yep.
Um what
Actually,
what
told the TI say yes. I got accepted.
Okay.
It was this AWACS career field manager at the Pentagon, which I'm sure he was a great person. But no, he's like, hey, you're chronic critical listed for AWACS. We
Yep.
can't release you.
It's rough.
Yeah.
I know a lot of cyber folks who fall into the exact same boat where they want to go do X, Y, and Z, and then someone goes, well, we need to do cyber defense against China, so that's tough. And
Yeah.
so then people stay all the time. So I've witnessed that rejection firsthand. So sorry that happened. And was that pretty immediate, or did you kind of expect it, or what was that? What was that like?
No, I mean, you say like, and when I talk to young people, or just, people that want to join like the military, and I tell them, cause it could still happen, nowadays. No, I didn't expect it at all, because being a TI is even my book, pretty prestigious, right? I mean, I had to take that 900 question psych test, right? I mean, I had my I've had a TS clearance, presidential support back in the day. I didn't need a TS when I was with AWACS. I was only doing secret stuff, but I had a TS at one point, so like my background was great. I did all it, I had the pictures with me and my blues, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're looking
No,
super,
and
looking super strapped.
God, right. High and tight, like eat
Of
like
course.
crazy. The interviews, no. And so for them to accept you, you're like, because not everybody gets accepted. So I get accepted. Now it's like, okay, we just got to wait. So I was an experienced flyer. So which means you only had to fly once a month. I only had to get 8 hours, right? And on AWACS, that's pretty much one flight. So I was flying once a month. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm golden. I just met my wife now. So we've been married 22 years. So I got divorced actually there, 96. This was 98. Man, it's just, she's from Oklahoma. So I had a plan. I was like, I'll go be a TI. And it was then, and I don't know if it's now, but like TIs could get their teaching certificate. So I was like, man, I'll get a teaching certificate, probably get out, become a teacher in Texas, excuse me, live up by Dallas. That's not far from Oklahoma City for my wife and her. Like, that'd be great. I was planning like my life out. And then when they came back and they were like, no, like, or AWACS was like, no, we're not going to let you go. I was like, oh, that's like, well, they're not ETS that I'm getting out. And they're like, bye.
Have fun. Good luck out there.
Yeah.
So what was that initial transition like for you? What did you how do you think you did? Like looking back on it now, was it a pretty tumultuous time? What did that look like?
Mid Billy, you're talking 2000. So this is the summer of 2000.
Yeah.
None of the programs we have now. I mean, none.
Mhm.
This is pre 9/11, right? Like none of it. Nothing, man. I mean, we had TAPS. I mean, I'm sure somebody who's really, I think we had TAPS class. Yeah, no. So yeah, I would say even with my career, it's funny. Like I'm spouting off some stuff. I actually went to go work down at the rescue squadron at Patrick Air Force Base. Um, I wasn't going to be a PJ or anything, but I was going to work on the Blackhawks, as in I was trying to be a door gunner, but the door gunners back then didn't have an AFSC. And so I was guard bumming, but without an AFSC, it was kind of going nowhere. Yeah. So that's when I moved back up to Maryland, and ended up landing the gig at MBNA. But I think for MBNA, I was from Baltimore. I went to a private, like all boys high school that's in that area. So it kind of has a nice prestigious name. I mean, it's not a college, but high school. I mean, it's like a $25,000 a year high school right now. So yeah, they saw some military service, right? And I showed up in a suit, but my resume made it through the door. And again, I started in collections, right? I mean, it was 30-day call-ins. I mean, yeah. But it was rough. Like there isn't anything remotely what we have now.
We'll talk about
Yeah.
it more later, but do you feel like that initial experience made the following transitions easier for you in terms of or how did that kind of affect your opinion in terms of separating from the military and then coming back in like that kind of
Yeah. I don't think I
experience?
ever really thought of it. It probably did, just because like I interviewed, like, you had to go through interviews, and that was corporate America. And then even when I became a cop, actually I was telling my wife, even what I'm doing now, like I'm still doing some interviews. I don't even prep for interviews now, which I'm sure any recruiter's probably like, oh my God. I'm not giving that advice, but I'm saying I have, and I'm not proud of it, but I've probably interviewed as a interviewee enough, but I've also been an interviewer,
Yeah.
right? And so so I'm 51 and I know myself, and so there's at a point now I'm just,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I came to know you from your time on LinkedIn, and you're clearly
yeah,
someone who's naturally very into storytelling, and you're good at interviewing if you know how to tell stories. Like that's
right.
the thing.
Yeah.
So I would imagine for you,
Yeah.
like you tell the same story enough that you can go. It's just like, what do you want to know about? I got you.
Yeah. But I would
So
say actually,
I
so
definitely
me telling you this story about like that time, like I haven't, like, I don't talk about my time at MBNA, and I don't put that on a resume, right? I mean, hey,
Yeah.
I was a credit analyst, back in 2000. I mean,
I
great.
mean, I can't even imagine what it was like calling a lady and having her say a plane just flew into the World Trade Center, and you're like, "Nice try." Like,
Yeah,
pay
right?
pay,
Because I've
pay
heard it
your
all.
credit. Yeah, pay your
Yeah.
credit card, and then it's like, "Oh no!" Like, I'll call you back. Click. So
Yep.
when you finished up, so when you were in NBNA and they
Mhm.
call you and the military calls you and says, "Hey, it's time to come back." Like,
Yep.
what was that like for you emotionally, and how'd you kind of move through that? Because definitely sounds like you were making moves, like you were moving.
Yep.
You had been kind of kicked to the curb by the military, so I'm sure there was some level of just like screw you, and then they're like, "Haha, psych, you're coming back." And
No, yeah.
what was
Well, that's
that
what I
like?
said when they called and said that. I was like, "No," and I mean, it sounds very kinda unpatriotic, but I mean, but you did hit the nail on the head. Like, I was like,
I
"Look, man,
tried.
like, I'm still in reserves. Yeah, I'll come help out, but, like, and again, this just happened. So, you know,
The wound is still fresh.
well, no, I mean, even 9/11 just happened,
Yeah.
so I don't even know, and I'm not even in the world that I know now of, like, what happened. I have, 12 Strong, the book that's sitting right there. Like, I have, like, you don't know, right? And we just now have all the stories and books and movies and stuff that are coming out. Yeah, so when they called, you're like, "No, man." Um, but I go down there, but I would tell you though, MBNA, like I said, I think they're the Bank of America now, but anyway, they actually paid my salary that whole year. I mean, the whole year. And I think this is 2001. I think I was probably making like 48,000, but still, I mean, I was a staff, right? So here I'm making my staff active duty pay, and they were paying me. Oh yeah, that I was balling that year.
Did you buy anything cool?
No, I can tell you we didn't do any credit cards. Like we were just paying cash for everything. And yeah, 2001, when you're not used to making that money, yeah, we made just like a little over like $100,000 and everything. You're like,
That's
woo!
that's big money. That's big
Yeah,
time
big
money.
money. So they were great. But I tell you, so I went back and actually, so I just got accepted to the Baltimore Police Department when those orders ended. So January of '03. Um, and MBNA actually expected me back, and I was just like, "Oh," and I remember this comment, and they were like, "Well, it was great." I mean, they were great to me, but I was like, "Hey," and again, I told them the story. I'm like, I'm with a lot of police officers. I've actually applied. I've been accepted." And they're like, "Well, what could we do to keep you?" Which is phenomenal to ask, right? And so, um, I think I made the comment that I remember this. It's like, if I could sit at my desk with a boonie hat and an M4, that'd be great. They were like,
Can't
I
do
don't think we
that.
can do that. Right.
So, what was it like? How did you end up like applying and interviewing for Baltimore PD? What was that process like?
Yeah. I mean, not that it's normal. Most police departments, you have to take a written test, you got to take a physical and then a psych and then medical. And so again, I'm on active duty orders though. So I'm doing all this. But again, luckily at Andrews, so I'm still local. Yeah. So I just made sure timing fell in to where, again, so because your schedule wasn't, Monday through Friday and weekends off. I forget what it was, but it was 12s. But there were times when I was off like during like a Monday, Tuesday, right? Or a Wednesday, Thursday. So I always was able to do everything. So I literally accomplished my whole process with that. Yeah. Then once I was through each phase, now it's like getting accepted to a college, right? Like I'm waiting for my letter, for my call. Yeah, sure enough. And so, yeah, but which was terrifying though at the end because it was, I can't remember. Maybe it was like November, December. I get you've been accepted. The academy is January and I'm still on orders and I didn't know exactly when they were going to end. Like, I think they might've like said January, but there was always a talk of like, "Hey man, we might, extend you guys. You might get kept on orders." Yeah. And I was like, again, military, I'm like, "No, like my career, like I have just been accepted to a police department." Like, "No," and luckily we didn't get extended. Yeah. And I went right into the academy in January of '03.
That's awesome. What was it? So, something I'm really interested about asking you then is
Yeah.
I feel like for a lot of people who are on active duty, and I'm sure you talk to enough veterans that you also get this. It almost feels like when you are applying for jobs or preparing for your transition and working, it's like you're cheating on the military. Like it's like you care about the mission less, or
Yeah.
you're not as dedicated to the cause for some reason. Did you did you struggle with that at all? And what advice might you, if you didn't, what advice might you give to somebody who is going through that?
Yeah. And I didn't struggle with it. And I would even tell you, so there's a sense of loyalty. So in the military, when that's happening, you know, you're getting out. So you want to do your job, right? If you're mission critical, like you have to do all that. Um, and again, like if your time is coming to a close, like the military isn't going to counter offer you, right? If they didn't do it when, like it's been months. So no, like you have to, again, stay focused, mission driven on what you're doing. But at the same token, the military, even nowadays, is well aware, right? But I would tell you, it's almost people that are transitioning, which again, I've been there, and I just saw like an Instagram reel that made me crack up because I've been there, where your boss is like, your boss sees you in the break room wearing like your really good clothes, right? And it's the meme, or it's the whatever, the reel, where it's the office, and he's like, why Dwight? And because you're interviewing. So
Yep.
I would tell you, if you're transitioning and you're at a company, you're at a company and you're interviewing. Because I've been there. Yes, maybe there you feel a little bad, right? But again, I go back to the military. You still do your job, like so that you know. Well, and again, I definitely admit, people who know me probably know my secrets, that I've been there. I've interviewed, right? They're like, "Why are you dressed up today?" What do you know? You're like, "Can I wear a nice shirt today? Like, I just want to look pretty
With all the
today."
questions.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I don't always
That's
just have to wear a t-shirt. God. And you're like, no, exactly. Definitely had a video interview. Um, but you still, but again, at that level though, it's about taking care of you. Billy, you and I talked, if everyone's listening, we talked like the other week, last week, and like where I'm at now, bouncing around kind of this year. And I say that it's my own personal thing. I feel like I've been bouncing around. Um, yeah, like there's loyalty, but there's also just like, hey man, like what am I doing with my life right now? Like I want to find my fit. And I know that can sound super hippie-ish, and hippie really, dates me, but it's just, it's not the military anymore. You don't have to put up with it. Right. I'm not, right. Unless you signed a contract for it, but most jobs now are at will employment. Right. Or if you're doing contract work, it's a contract, and I can give you, 15 or 30 days notice, and
Yeah.
right,
No,
call it even.
I don't think it sounds hippie at all. I just think that it's a um I think that people can get too, they miss the forest through the trees almost, in the sense that you tie your self or your person to a cause or to a company or to an organization to such an intense degree that you almost forget that at some point your time with that cause or organization is going to come to an end. And like most of the time you're just a number in the organization. Like you might have been a very effective number, but the show goes on without you. And
Yeah.
so
So yeah.
would yeah,
Yeah. No, and we haven't even mentioned, right? So I was at Black Rifle Coffee.
yeah.
I left Black Rifle on my own, a little bit after, I don't know, like 6 months after they went public. Um, Not anything crazy. It was my decision, but yeah, like you become a face. And I mean, I wasn't, Evan Matt or anybody crazy like that, but like, even like when on LinkedIn, you become and I still am, but
Mhm.
now again, this year that I've been kind of, like I said, bounced around, people are like, oh my God, like you become the face of, or just a brand advocate, or just even on my LinkedIn, right? I call it a brand evangelist.
Mhm.
Because you are, if I'm applying to your job and you accept me, like it's definitely very mutual. Like I want to be there.
Yeah.
Right. Um, if I end up leaving, 67 days later, that's an inside joke because I left a company, right? After 67 days, it just, like anything, things can be a fit initially. I mean, we've all dated, right? You've dated someone, hopefully, and then
Yeah.
after 2 months of it, you're just like,
This
no,
isn't working.
yeah, this is
Yeah.
working.
So after you finished up, so you apply, you're in the Baltimore PD, and how did you decide to do Ravens while you were there? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, no, well, so I went to Raven school. I was in the reserves before I
Okay.
went to Baltimore.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
which
gotcha.
actually would tell
Okay.
you, like, yeah. So, but it was the TACP thing. If that's kind of
Yeah.
where you're
Yeah,
alluding,
yeah, yeah.
I was running and gunning. I did the bare minimum of patrol. I did patrol for 2 years, and in Baltimore, I mean, Baltimore's, it's 300 plus homicides. So if you're doing and putting in the work, like, you can move up. And so I did. So I was in patrol for 2 years, which is the minimum. And then boom, applied and got snagged up and was doing I worked on the east side of the city, did a lot of enforcement and narcotics over there, and then went into the Violent Crime Impact Division, which was a citywide narcotics. And then even did SWAT for a year, but then left SWAT and kind of went back to my drug unit just because of scheduling. Kind of conflicts. My family was growing. I think we just had my second son by then and everything. So yeah. Um, yeah. So the TACP thing kind of just came. Like I said, I was running and gunning, and, like, again, it was just like I was still in shape. I mean, at that point, so I was 35. So in '07, I was 35. So I didn't go through TACP school until I was 35. I mean, it sounds super egotistical, but so my buddy Brad Smith, so Brad was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. All the other guys will probably, if they ever listen to this, would be like, "Oh, you weren't as good." Brad was better, yes, but I remember beating a lot of those guys, like, on the runs, and the instructors yelling at them like the old man. But I was also the class. I ended up being so it's funny. I ended up being my class leader for my TACP tech school class, and then I was class commander for my Baltimore City Police Academy class.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Um, no, I was 35, and I mean, like I said, I had a solid 35 to about 42, like, staying there. And then you start hitting your 40s, I could feel it.
Yeah, get a little creaky in
Yeah.
the knees. So, how did you find? So, if the unit there was only 6 people in Harrisburg, how did
Yeah.
you how did you go from like working doing all the cop stuff to hearing about that, like combat air control and like all that kind of stuff? Like, did
I
they
had
come and
only
find you or
No.
okay?
No, no. I
No,
had
no.
always, and when I joined the Air Force, I joined to be a PJ, right? But I came
Oh,
in
okay,
general. Yeah. So I had
got it.
glasses, and I did PRK back in 2001, actually right before 9/11. Um, and so I had a good 17, 15 year run of having 2020. But when I joined, no, I've always wanted to. So I knew,
Okay,
that there was, in the reserves, there were PJs. I think CCT, I think they still have some guard units, right?
yep,
No, and then I was just looking at, yeah, and the 140, so it's the 148th ASOS. Yeah, they end up popping up.
that's cool.
But
That's
when I
really
when I went up there too, like, I had no idea that I was like number 6.
cool. When did you find out that you were like you were the first person on the second hand of people that
Right. I took the pass test. So you got to take I forget what pass stands for. You got to take the test, right? You got to do all your running and stuff like that. Um, yeah, I took that, and it was after that. So I took that and ended up passing it. And then it's even like an interview and you get accepted. And it was after I was accepted. I was like, cool. And then, cause then it's like, you go to your first drill, and we were the guys who started the unit. Well, no, we were at there's a cast range, a bombing range up there. We were in a trailer at the top of the bombing range, that it was like a 2 mile long tank trail. So if you had
oh,
a car, like, I mean, unless you wanted it all cracked, but it was literally a tank trail. I mean, a dirt, it was paved, but still, like, it was tank trail. But it was 2 miles up, and we were in a double wide trailer at the top of the bombing range.
that's crazy. What was the so where did you go? Like, what were Did you deploy while you were working where you
In
work at the
Oklahoma.
ASOS? Okay.
Yeah, I deployed in 2011 from the Oklahoma guys. Yeah, so I supported active duty. So I'm out in Oklahoma. It's 2011. We're spun up to deploy with the infantry unit there for Oklahoma, the 45th, to go to RC East. And so we were all spun up, it's big time spin up stuff. And so you're doing that. And the unit got a call, and an active duty JTAC, right, broke his ankle or something, like on convalescent leave. He was on convalescent leave or his bereavement leave or something. I forget what the story was, but I heard he broke his ankle. And so they were short of JTAC, and they were like, who wants it? And I was like, send me. And it wasn't anything to do with the guard unit. Cause I mean, when you go, there is no difference between guard and active duty, right? Like my guys, my unit that went to RC East, I mean, they had a lot going on. But it was just, I'm just one of those guys where I was like, hey, like I'll be the lone survivor, which it's not like that. But a little bit about me is, so Brad was killed in RC South. And then that's where I knew because I heard it was going to be down in RC South. I was like, and that's why that was like a secondary, right? Like, yes, like I want to go where my friend, right? And so literally, so I go with 10th Mountain, and I get down all the way to 287. It's one of their companies. And I'm actually literally at the same fob where Brad was and then farmed out. And so when I was deployed, I was running up the same ops where he was.
What was that like for you, being able to operate in just the same area as your friend? Like, was that cathartic? I don't know if cathartic is the right therapeutic. I don't know if what the right word is, but did that give you some
No,
kind of
probably
closure?
horrible. How do I say horrible? So I was a tech sergeant, and as a tech sergeant, I probably should have stayed like more in the talk and taken the leadership role. Um, I had a huge chip on my shoulder. So I was going on any mission that was allowable outside the wire, which, cause I didn't want to stay on the fob. Again, I wasn't going to go to Afghanistan again. I did, when 9/11 happened with the street forces, I was like, I'm not like, so, and I'm in the area, right? So I was like, nope. Like not that I wasn't afraid, but like I knew like training and I was good. So I was like, send me. And I was going on everything. And then I was a jerk for sure, because it was on one patrol. We got into a firefight. A 60 round hits like 15 feet for me, a mortar round, and blah, blah, blah. But long story short, my captain, who we didn't have our own officers for TACP at that time. They do now, thank God. We didn't. And so this guy was an AWACR. And so he, and then from there, he was like, all right, you're going to be very limited on what you're going in. And I really remember taking a picture of myself wrapped in bubble wrap, because I was pissed. Like because we got mail, right? So I remember finding some bubble wrap, and I wrapped myself in it. And I was like, I guess this is what happened when you send the JTAC out to war. And I was so mad. I mean, stuff happens, man, right? But at JTAC and TACP, they are force multipliers, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But, and these weren't unnecessary risks that we're taking. The Army guys needed us, right? And so you're it with them, right? You are there. So even like when that firefight happened, well, I didn't get close air support. I also, TACP, JTACs, we can do artillery. So we were doing artillery, platoon sergeant got hit. You're an extra radio, you're an extra hand. Like, TACP are really versatile, for that. So like I said, none of these were unnecessary, patrols. If the Army guys were going, why not send me? Right. So yeah, no, I mean, well, so that you asked that, like, no, it wasn't probably therapeutic. It probably, like I said, I probably had a chip on my shoulder, and maybe took unnecessary risks. But again, it was for a good cause, but yeah. Would I change any of it? No, and not a chance. And if that captain wouldn't have held me back, I would have went out the door the very next day. Like I was cleared. I mean, I failed my TBI test, but back in 2011, TBI was still kind of like, did you black out or pass out? And I was like, nope. He's like, you're fine. I was like, okay, well, the Air Force guys are telling me to take this test, the TBI test, which I failed, but they're like, but you didn't black out or pass out, so you're
You're
good.
good to go. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
fine. No damage. No damage
yeah,
whatsoever.
yeah.
Wow. Okay. So when you no, I'm sorry. This is like your career is sick. Like this is such a I don't
It's
even
all over.
well, I've never even talked to anyone who's been in so many different roles in the military,
So,
and I've interviewed quite a few people at this point. So like
yeah.
this is cool. So when you knew that it was time to leave the like your JTAC time was coming to a close and you were going to be leaving, um what did that like did you have the chance to stay in the military, or did you like what did why did you decide to not continue service at that point?
Yeah, so I at that point was over 20 years. I think uh I couldn't even tell you. My wife does personnel. So my wife is still in. So my wife's a master sergeant, so she does personnel. And I actually need to call because about my retirement. Like retirement's weird for the guard. It's not like you have to do an application for it, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, actually no, like I could have stayed in. So I went actually up to the Tulsa Guard unit in Oklahoma and was the acting group for a sergeant. So again, went through interviews, went through a selection phase, and I was, uh, I think Colonel Wright, and if he listened to this, excuse me, I think he made 1 star, so he retired as a brigadier general, but then he was just a full bird. He was the group commander, and so I was the acting group for sergeant for the Tulsa wing, and they were trying to find me a first sergeant school slot. So I'd been in the role for like 3 months, and and they're trying to find me a slot because like you, you can't just keep doing the job without going to school for it. So I'm in it, and at that point, but I caught myself. And so what happened is actually I caught myself. When I say I caught myself, I got a picture of my wife and I still like my last day in uniform. I had my sleeves, right? Cuffed in. I had my wizard sleeves cuffed in. My boots were probably bloused to the very lowest part of your ankle, but they were still bloused, right? By definition, I wasn't supposed to be wearing my beret. I probably still wore it occasionally. And if I were around, I'd probably still even arrange a roll of my patrol cap. And as a first sergeant, you're supposed to look out for some of that, right? There are those standards. Now I'd say my uniform looked good. My pockets were sewn down, and I probably still ironed my uniform. And so again, I came from a TACP mindset, man. If it didn't detract from safety,
And it
like
wasn't worth
it's
it.
good, man.
Yeah.
Like it's like don't sweat the small stuff. I know there's different sayings, man. Like, hey, if you don't pay attention to these small details, how do I trust you for the big details?
Mhm.
When it kind of came to a lot of that stuff, and I agree with some of those things. Like there are like the devil's in the details. I get it. But like when it goes to that stuff, like if I look good and it's not detracting from the safety of it, like don't sweat those small things because I am so focused on the big things that really matter. That's where my mind is. Not if my sleeves cuffed in, you're like, it looks better, right? Like, don't tell me it doesn't. So you can't be a first sergeant, kind of with that mentality. So I raised my hand and I was like, hey, I'm going to retire. I was like, yeah, like I am more of a hindrance, like to myself, like to you guys. Like the time is there. Yeah.
I mean, good on you for making that decision. I think that there's a bunch of people who wouldn't have the self-awareness to go, I am detracting from this role, so it's time to go. Like I don't think people have that level. I don't think some people have that level of awareness.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think older actually, and I'm not even flipping it, but we talked and I left I was working doing a sales job for We Are the Mighty, the Task and Purpose
Yep.
team. And my VP, Kathy, and I were talking, and but it's that same mentality. Like, I'm not a salesperson, and we were doing a one on one.
Mhm.
And again, I was like, hey, look, like the team needs someone who can hit this really big quota for goal for sales. Like, it's not me. And I was like, so I'll punch and you guys can hire somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The I want to definitely dig into that mentality here
Yep.
soon, but when you raised your hand and you said, "Okay, it's time for me to retire," what did your what was the transition like from from serving to you're completely out? Because up until that point, you'd always been in either a military or a law enforcement role. So
Yep.
your life had pretty much from 1991 to what 2016.
Yep.
So 25 years of like to serve and protect essentially.
Yep.
What was that like?
Uh, it was easy when I say that because Afghanistan was still going on. I cheated. When I say I cheated, I went into defense contracting. JTACs make phenomenal ISR, so intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So the guys sitting on the back of the King Air 350s, 300s, or whatever, running the ball, the L3 ball, yeah, make phenomenal ballers. And so when I say I cheated, I literally I kept going. I worked for an aviation company, Momentum Aerospace Group, MAG, just because of a guy that I knew was a TACP, was, God, I think Matt was even higher than the program manager. I forget, but Matt was up there, and then brought me on board. So I was doing contract work in Afghanistan. So I was going to Afghanistan for 60, 90 days and then coming home for, 30 and 60 days.
And so how
Yeah.
long
So I
were you
cheated. Yeah.
I mean I mean, kind of. What did how long were you doing that role operating being a sensor operator?
Yeah. Probably for almost about a year and a half, 2 years, because I stopped doing it in Afghanistan, but then had a friend in Oklahoma. So we were living in Oklahoma, and um, they had all the MARSOC contracts. So I worked for them, and we were doing all the MARSOC pre-deployment training. So I was still in the States. So yeah, so at that point I was still in the States, but that's kind of where then I really became, because I did that for about like 6 months. And then the CEO, Daryl Wilkerson, Daryl's great. Daryl needed somebody, and my buddy Stan comes to me and says, hey, Daryl needs like a sergeant major, excuse me, like a first sergeant or somebody wants to talk to you. So, it's no resume. It's go in and talk to Daryl. So you're sitting there, and we talked and got selected. And that's where on my LinkedIn or even my resume, it says senior analyst. So I was the senior analyst to the CEO. I didn't analyze anything, but we didn't know kind of really what the title was. And I was rocking and rolling in that, and that was great. That's because I stopped flying. So I stopped, traveling. But again, the travel is even when I was doing it, they were like Mississippi, California, places that were doing the more shock stuff at. Um, but that's when then my wife decided to take these. So she's guard, but to take this assignment down here. So it's a full-time guard assignment. Yeah. So yeah. And that's kind of when I came down here, and I was just, I really didn't love Oklahoma. So I was like, yes, let's go to San Antonio for sure.
San Antonio's a great spot. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of the Pearl District. Really good,
Oh,
really
right.
good
I love
food,
it. I
really
mean,
good. Yeah.
but that's where when we talk about transition is we're talking about like this, obviously this is what it's for, is I was even at that point, my ego still pumped up because I knew Grunt Style had opened up their headquarters down here. I knew Black Rifle and the team were down here, and then Yeti. So I was a huge Yeti fan. Austin's about an hour away. So I was like, ugh, easy.
Yeah.
Got this.
And so what was
Took a few
that
months, not a lot. It took maybe like 3 or 4 months, which is again crazy, especially when you PCS. But at this point, like I'm a mil spouse, right? So now I'm a military spouse, and I'm a retiree, but now I'm a military spouse. But yeah, and then got picked up with Black Rifle, which was great, and stayed with them for about almost like 3.5 years.
So then when do you feel like you really since you cheated on your
Yeah.
first like in your first job out, when did you really start feeling like, oh, I'm not part of like the service anymore? Like when did you really start to feel that kind of separation from the last 25 years of your life?
Yeah. Well, probably, I think when I took that job with Daryl, I think when I stopped flying, so I call it balling. So when I stopped flying, right, you kind of, it's like being operational, right? So you're operational, you're doing stuff, and now you kind of get the back office job. So it was when I took that, because at that point I was going to board meetings. So the company was Commuter Air Technology, and now they're called Meta Special Aerospace. Um, Daryl sent me to London for a week to meet with the people that ended up, being or the owners now. So
Mm.
here I was going to board meetings and meeting investors and people that were, bought the company. That's probably when. Yeah. So that would have been, oh God, don't quote me, like 2017-ish, I think.
And what was that like for you at that time when like you're out of the fight almost? Like what
Yeah.
was that
Right.
like for you mentally?
I think it was fine. I mean, cause you fought long enough, right? And then but you're still, and it's even with Black Rifle, you still got like a pinky toe, or like you still got like, still
Yeah.
dipped in, like you're still not gone. Just because again, a lot of the people, like you get even a Black Rifle, like JT was a TACP, right? So JT is one of the co-founders, if people aren't tracking. So he and I did the same thing, and then other people came on board. So like our military community, once we leave, like everyone's out there, right? And so it's, yeah, so it was fine. And then you learn enough too. Like I've been on enough TDYs at my point. So like when Daryl's going to send me to London, like I wasn't the young kid to be like, oh my God, like I'm getting a trip to London, and mess anything up. Like I knew what my mission was. Like I'm meeting the future owners of this, right? Board members, stuff like that. So, yeah. So just treating it literally like, an official, like, say a government TDY. Yeah.
I think that you bring up an excellent point when you talk about the how when you were working for Black Rifle, it almost was like you kept your pinky toe a little bit in, and I
Mhm.
think that that really speaks to the power of just the community and like fostering a community of veterans around you when you get out of the military. Um, how have you tried to maintain that community connection once you like got out and retired? And what would you recommend to people who are preparing for their transition to foster their own community so that they're not just on an island when they get out?
Yeah, I think you have to go. So what I did is, so when I came down to San Antonio, again, I didn't know anybody, right? My wife, we don't know anybody. Like we don't
Yeah.
know anybody, right? And she's working at Randolph Air Force Base. There's a group here in San Antonio, Mill City meetups. So Sam and Ray Domingo. Sam was a recruiter for Sam's his wife. Ray was the recruiter for the Air Force. Sam's, her wife, they were, he was in, and they created this group. Quincy and Chuck, guy Quincy probably going to kill me. I know Chuck was in the Army. I think Quincy was in the Army too. So they created this group, and they do monthly meetups. And so I remember going to one of my first ones. Like the founder for Grunt Style was there. Tim Jensen, who's still with Grunt Style, was there, and like you were hearing those guys. And I got picked up a Black Rifle, and then once I got picked up a Black Rifle, like I really kind of became involved with them because I saw the power that it would be. Because you would have like 50 to 200 people show up, and we're at different locations. It could be a bar, one could be somewhere else, but it wasn't a job fair. It was networking, right? It's just literally talking to somebody, you know, hey, and and networking can lead to obviously jobs. I mean, I find that jobs really go to that. So that's what got me. And so that's what I would really recommend. And even now, like I'm talking to you and people probably like, and I'm not introverted. I mean, I'm extroverted, but like you go to a lot of these sometimes and it's like, oh, because you still walk in and you'll know maybe a good familiar 5 to 10 faces, but you still have like 150 other ones that you don't know. Right. It can be a little daunting, and they're usually at night, right? Like 6 p.m. You're tired. You got to be turned on. Like being an extrovert and being turned on is tough work, man.
Yeah, it's being switched on because you want to have good conversation. Like you don't want to just show up and be like, "Hey, what's up? I'm Billy. How are you? Good. Nice to meet you. What
Right.
do you like?
Right.
I don't know. What do
Yeah.
you like? Yeah, it's cool. We're in a brewery. Do you like beer? Stuff like that. You
Yeah.
know?
Cause you're there to help people. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I don't ever, and I don't want to make it sound like it's never a chore by any means, but
No,
that's what you have. But the reason you have to do it. Like
of
I've
course.
actually drugged my wife. So my wife is kind of more introverted. She's gone to about like 2 or 3 of them with me. which isn't many, but she's gone. But she doesn't need to. But I'm like, you don't need to now. And that's what Ray and team and Quincy and the whole everyone sees is you'll get people who are still in.
Yeah.
And because, it could be a year or 2 years, but they're like, hey, I see this. I've heard about it. Like, I want to just hang out. And you're like, yeah, great.
Yeah.
When
And I
are
think
you
that,
getting out? Like, be like, yeah, I'm not getting out from 2 years from now. And you're like, okay.
yeah, I think it's good that
Yeah.
people do that though. I mean, hopefully one of my goals for this podcast is get enough reach into the military because people don't need to necessarily be looking for jobs 3 years out. And they actually, if
No.
you're listening to this, don't look for jobs 3 years out. They won't hire you.
Right. That's a
But
bit extreme. Yeah. Well, I
exactly.
mean, LinkedIn, right? We talk about LinkedIn, Michael Quinn, right? So
Yeah.
if people are listening to this, if they're not, Michael Quinn on LinkedIn,
Great dude.
he is going and doing, seminars and stuff at the Sergeant Major's Academy, and groups of like, 200 and 300 senior NCOs, which is phenomenal. Like that reach nowadays for the military, again, to 2000 when I got out,
It's crazy.
right?
Yeah. It's night and day.
You don't have it. So yeah. And I'm not saying there's any excuse. That's the other thing too, right? There's never there's a ton of resources, right? And that's the first thing. There's always a ton of resources, but each person's journey is difficult. But like, you should never be able to say like, I didn't know or I didn't have any help
Yeah.
because, yeah,
I agree. And
yeah,
I think the primary thing that you run into is not that there's a lack of resources or even that there's a lack of time. It's that the military, and I would love your opinion on this. I believe that the military, should you let it, does a really good job of just kind of putting you on rails and you don't
right,
really have to do much. Like you get to put in preferences, but everything just kind of keeps moving forward, whether you
yeah,
want to or not. And so if you're someone who enjoys that, then all of a sudden you come to the end of the ride and you have to put in all of the energy into your transition and you're the only person who's going to put in that energy. And
yeah,
so then people are like, I don't know what to do because I've never had to make these kinds of critical decisions before, which is tough. Like it really is a tough place to be in if you're
well,
not
it is,
prepared.
and yeah, and starting salaries, like even to know what you're worth, and like I said, there's a ton out there. Because again, like, and you'll see it too, right? Just because you were, lieutenant colonel doesn't make you,
Not
a
at all.
VP or CEO level, right? But I would tell you, and again, I was probably guilty of that just because I was master sergeant. That doesn't make me, an ops super or something. But you're like, does it? I don't know. Like, there's different things, but yeah, like it's not. You said like the rails. It's not cookie cutter, and you are. But it's on the same token, though. Getting out now with all those resources, it's not naked and afraid. Like you're
Very
not.
true.
Yeah, you're not naked and afraid, man.
Yeah.
Like it is. You're fully clothed. Like there's a line. I mean, there might be a line right to the kitchen to get food and shelter and stuff, but man, like you're gonna get it. Like
Yeah.
there's a ton. Yeah.
The only way that you don't have information getting out of the military today is because you chose to literally engage with none of the information that's provided for you.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And that's where, but that's, sometimes too, I find it funny. Just, I work with some nonprofits and stuff and you're like, hey, have you heard of this nonprofit? And they're like, nope. And I was probably guilty of that, like a Black Rifle. And I say that to the token of like, I didn't know about a lot of other different coffee companies. Like you get so laser focused, like in your lane, that you don't take those blinders off to see the world all outside, right? And to be able to get that in. So when, people are getting out, I mean, I guarantee you there's probably people still in the military getting out and being like, LinkedIn, what? Like, I need to be on that. And you're like,
Oh yeah.
oh my gosh. Yeah. Right.
I mean, I didn't know. I got lucky enough that my brother-in-law, who had gotten out of the Marines 2 years before me, he was a recruiter, and
Yep.
so when I was getting out, he was like, "Dude, build a profile and get on this thing because this is how you're going to find a job." And it was,
Yep.
but that was I had no idea, and so it's very true. Like there's this ocean of information, you just have to go find it, and it's like
Yeah.
things that I think everyone knows about getting out. A lot of people don't know. Like you and I know about Michael Quinn. There's a ton of people getting out of the military. Like who? Who's that? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah. Right.
and I'm like, you don't know about the LinkedIn guy? Like What's up with that? So
Yeah.
this
Well,
is funny.
it's thing, like, so like we were talking about earlier, way earlier in the beginning, like about like the chat GPT with me messing
Yeah.
around with it. It's Google though. Like there's, I can't stand it when, and I say I can't stand it. Like I love my friends, but if they ask me something and you're like, Google it, dude. Like there is, there is the tool out there that will give you the answers, man. Like, oh my God.
I get it. I'm because I'm the only cyber capable person in my family and extended family. I'm tech support for everybody, and
Right.
my number one response to people when they ask me questions is, "Have you tried typing that question into Google and reading what comes up?"
Right. Like
That's what I'm
it's
gonna do.
crazy. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing with Chat GPT. Maybe that'll be a video, Billy, for next week. I'll do like a prompt. I'm getting out of the military and I am a E7, what should be my steps? That's actually a really good prompt, and see what it spits back at you.
Don't worry, I won't release this until after next week, so you can seem like it's original.
I did what I would do. I did my third video this afternoon, just messing around, but I did, because I get emails from the copy.ai that gives you daily prompts.
Oh,
And I
cool.
like playing with them. And one of the prompts was like, hey, compare like these two products and blah, blah, blah. And so I actually compared Beretta and Glock. I mean, I like Beretta and Glock. I mean, I carried Beretta for years, obviously, right? And then I carried Glock for years. But it's like, hey, compare them. And because some people are saying like the AI stuff, it can lie to you. Maybe, right? Maybe there is misinformation. But from what I just did today, comparing Glock and Beretta, they were spot on, right? They talked about their magazine capacity, the trigger, blah, 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 and
Mhm.
it was all spot on.
That's awesome. And it's
Yeah.
I don't really think that it's lying as much as if you view it as like you're talking to a somewhat intelligent human, like I just think it's more mistaken, or
Yeah.
it's just really trying to please you because it's designed to give you answers. And so when people are like, it lied, as a technology guy, I look at that person and go, if we're at the point where ChatGPT is capable of lying to you, then we're in the timeline where we saw Terminator in theaters and now we've seen Skynet happen in real life. Like, you don't want to
No, and
believe
that's
that
what
it's lying to
yeah,
you. Like, that means
right.
it's malicious. That means we have a malicious artificial intelligence that we're asking questions to. And that's
Which is
way
make it
worse.
scary.
Yeah, it's
Right. Yeah.
horrible.
No,
So,
I know. And I don't mean to laugh, because I mean, it's, if
no, it's
people's,
funny. It's funny.
that's their vision of it. I would tell you though, and it's why I've been doing these videos, and this comes out after, right? But it's very polarized. It's very like, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat,
Yeah.
I'm pro 2A or, against it. And you're just like, man, like it's, I literally said on the one video, like I said, I was like, it is a tool in
Yep.
the toolbox, man. Like, just don't throw out that wrench or that screwdriver. Like, just, like just keep it there. And I'm just saying, like, but a lot of people are like, well, I don't want someone writing the content because it's not, it's not authentic. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I get that,
I've seen
but
the debates.
some of my content has been written by it to a degree.
Hmm.
I edit, right? I
Yeah.
read, proofread. I'm like, I don't like that. Like, I feel like you're like Iron Man, like you're Tony Stark, where
All
you're
the
swiping.
stuff.
Like, I don't like that. I
Yeah.
don't like that. Put this in here.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. And you're just like, okay, okay. And then, right. So did Jarvis build it or did Tony Stark build it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just a very I agree. I think it's like a very slippery slope argument though of like you're
Yeah.
using this tool and therefore that renders your content not genuine. And like my argument would be like social media schedulers have existed for a very long time and
Sure,
like
Brad.
I didn't come up with the idea today. I came up with the idea 3 weeks ago. It just posted today. So does that make it less
Right.
genuine? Like it's one of those slippery slope arguments where it's like unless you made it immediately in the moment at that time by
Yeah.
yourself, then is it genuine or not? Like it's weird. And
Well,
I
yeah.
think it's very interesting how
Well,
people
that's what really
view
prompted me. And
that.
that's where I love LinkedIn as a platform. I mean, I love Instagram too, but like, I don't put any of the videos that I made on Instagram just because Instagram is more like, but LinkedIn, it lends itself to, it's a professional debate. And the video I did yesterday and a video that I'm putting out like tomorrow, I say video that I'm putting out, like, I mean, I mess around with Canva, right? And just, play with it. And, but it's some people, it's like, again, there's that sea of knowledge and some people just don't want to swim, but if they're swimming, now they're just seeing me. And so, yeah, there's some people now have been like, oh, okay, well, let me just dabble with it. I got one friend, she said, let me dabble with it. And I was like, it's not going to bite. Yeah. Log in, right? Give it some prompt and see what it spits back out to you.
It's funny, people who have yet to touch ChatGPT, I look at them and I'm like, this is like the iPhone. This is the only thing that this is that, like, in terms of impact on society, that is that level. Like the iPhone and ChatGPT are probably I will die before I see anything this affected that has such an effect on society ever again. Like those
Yeah.
are the
Well, I
two
mean, I would
things.
say it's even, yeah, and I haven't even gotten into it, but it's the world of plagiarism too, right? So, where I can sniff out so now we have the AI website to create my content. Now I got a website that can detect AI content. Now I have a website that can paraphrase my AI content to avoid the AI content detectors.
So stupid. It's crazy. It makes new jobs, I guess. Like everyone.
You talk
eh,
about entrepreneurship. I guess if you,
Yeah.
right? Because
Make
they are
make a new
all over, man. Like my
sure.
Instagram feed, since I play around with it, a little bit, is nothing but these are the new top AI websites and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, every day, like it seems like something.ai.io is popping up. Like, you're like,
Yep.
man,
It's a new gold rush. It's NFTs. It's NFTs in 2023. So, but
right.
so something that I'm
Yeah.
actually really interested about for you is you're really into LinkedIn, you're really into Instagram, you've worked in marketing and social media since Black Rifle. And
Mhm.
I think that, so like for me, I was a cyber warfare officer. I get out now, I do cybersecurity. Super
Right.
easy one-to-one translation of my skills. For you, on
Right.
the other hand, like you were a cop who then got really good at operating radios really, really quickly to call in like fire support.
Right.
How did you end up at marketing? Because I feel like for a lot of people in the military, especially folks that are closer to the fight, like your actual trigger pullers, there's like you're a warrior, and there's a lot of parts of polite society where that warrior skill set doesn't
Sure.
translate. So how did you overcome that and get into the field that you're currently in?
Yeah. No. And so, Evan, if he ever listens to this, I really owe it to Evan. Like, so when I came on more as really his executive assistant slash a project manager. And so
Mhm.
for that year and a half was doing a lot of that. Um, but even those guys, right? So, I mean, Evan, Matt, JT, like they're all military. And so they're not classically trained. Like they don't have a marketing degree. I don't know. I think Evan and Matt does. I don't know about JT. Like they have degrees, but I think they're in business or something, right? They're not in marketing. So they're not classically trained marketing, but again, they built a brand. And so it became relationships. And so that's even where I'm getting at with me. I think as a TACP and a cop, like if you're good at being a TACP and you're good at being a cop, then you're usually good at, like sociology, a little bit of psychology, which are all about relationships. And that's really what marketing is. Marketing and branding are very much a lot of that, the people, your audience. Um, Now I would tell you in marketing, there's very specific nuances. I mean, there's paid media now, right? You got paid media searches. Are you a Google and Facebook ads, SEO certified person, email campaigns. But I would tell you, even with email campaigns, like you're a consumer. And if like, okay, what kind of emails do I like? Um, and then the platforms aren't anything crazy. There's MailChimp, right? Omnisend, like those are just two platforms that I know off like top of my head, right? That do emails. They're very Google, Microsoft. I mean, it's point and click, right? And you can move and it's Canva, right? I mean, you can build stuff and right. So if you have a little bit of creativity, so that's where I was. So that's kind of what it was. So Evan, the guys brought me on. Man, I was in their pocket for that solid year and a half, like that first year and a half, just doing, seeing, absorbing everything, right? Contributing, but never contributing, to any creative standpoint, but just always observing them, seeing how they made their creative decisions. And then that's when Evan flipped me over and put me into marketing operations, which then fell into a lot of the events, but it was a lot of the sponsorships and partnerships. And then even so in there, then working more with I say the real marketing team is, the guy, John, who ran the email campaigns, and then Mod, who had the website. You have all these teams, but they all have to work together. And so but and then we were there, you're in the office too, right? And then COVID happened and you're out of the office, but like we would still, if you lived here in San Antonio, like I still went to the office. So it was great. Yeah. So it was, it was OJT. I guess
Yeah.
that long story, I bet you probably just could have answered it with it's on the job training.
It's
Yep.
cool because I think that you hone in on something that I think is important for people to hear, though, which is you came in and you were good at relationship building and you were willing to work.
Yep.
And those are like, if you're good at relationship building, which goes back to the power of networking, which we talked about. If you're good at networking, you're good at building those relationships, and you're willing to work, you can really overcome many different technical deficiencies that you might have
Yeah.
in a field that you aren't classically trained in. And I think that
Yeah.
that is
Exactly.
a great I think that that's great advice for people to um absorb. And I mean, shoot, again, like you're a dude who went from calling in fire support to doing marketing for, at the very least, one of the most prolific coffee companies in America, which
Right. Yeah. Yeah, well, and but that's where your relationship building goes now too nowadays. Like I said, staying with that one company for those 67 days. You were like, well, Dan, like you did a really crappy job then in building that relationship. No, no. Oh, I did my best, but at that point I knew right. I was just ace. This is what happens. And it's the thing with, it's not like the military. You can have a bad relationship, say with your supervisor, right? And still do 20 years. On the outside, you're the CMO, air quotes, and you work for the CEO. I mean, it's at will employment. So you start getting a bad attitude, you start becoming toxic, or even if not, you just not performing how they want you to perform, you can get let go. So again, one of the most recent, I just got let go from a company out in Pennsylvania because they thought they wanted remote work. But 2 months into it, they're like, yeah, like this remote work's not. And I literally got a call, um, which, it stings to always be let go, but it really stings because it's like, tell me my work was crap. Cause then I get feedback. Okay. Well, it's crap. Like, I didn't do well at my email campaigns. Okay. But when it's literally like, oh yeah, like the remote thing and just, we know how COVID works, and I'm not a huge remote fan. Obviously, I do love working remote, but I'm not a fan because I do like the in-person office stuff. But I just feel like, yeah, letting someone go, and I'm not bashing them really, but I'm just saying like it happens. But again, you can't control. Imagine again, if the military, right? The military just lets you go. You're like, yeah,
that would be tough. I think, I mean, I don't even know what some people would do if the military was just like, time to go. You're out. I mean, I guess people went through it when sequestration happened in 2013, but
yeah.
I was,
Well, even EPRs, right? So people
yeah.
listening and listen performance reports, right? And your OPRs. I mean, I don't know what it. Excuse me, I don't know what it takes to get kicked out.
I don't think. I think you have to kill somebody or do a copious amount of drugs. I think those are the two things that I've seen that got people killed or kicked
Yeah,
out. So
because it's a 5, right? So when they're listed, it's a 5. You get a high as a 5, and if you get a 3, which is right, God forbid, like you probably
yeah,
are not
the
happy if you
worst
got a
person
3,
ever.
right? I think
Yeah,
3, you could still do 20 years if you keep getting 3s.
yeah. Which is
Yeah,
funny that back in the day, I remember Firewall Fives were like that was like the whole thing, and then it was just funny because it's like, well, three is supposed to be the middle of the pack, and they're like, dude, if you give someone a three, like you're literally ruining their life. And I was like, what's the
yeah,
point?
right.
Let's just do one, two, and three then. Like what's the point of four and five?
Oh
Um,
yeah,
so for you, something that I'm really interested in getting your take on is
yeah.
you've shown this when we were talking before, you talked about identifying like, hey, I was in task and purpose and I just didn't see that it was a good fit. I was this group shirt and I didn't see that it was a good fit. So I left. and then I was at Black Rifle Coffee, and I decided that it was time to move on. I think that like in all of those cases, Task and Purpose is a pretty like it's a well known
No, those guys are great.
the
Yeah.
yeah, well-known
Yeah.
brand. Black Rifle, very well-known brand. Group first shirt, high position in that specific in that military organization. So you've walked away from opportunities that had a lot of um, credibility and
Yeah.
just a lot of benefit tied to them because you felt like they were not a good fit for you. And so I don't believe that a lot of people have the ability to do that, and I'm really curious, why do you feel like you do?
Man, I don't know. Billy, I mean, I love that one. That's one of those, that's a Dr. Phil tough question. I don't, when I say I don't know, I mean, there was a point, right? So there's not everyone likes you, right? Like, so I'm sure there were points in my career when I was, especially when I was a TACP, where I was probably a jerk, right? Blah, blah, blah. And I can remember making some, right, emotional decisions, which I think it finally, for me, it became age. So it was even, so leaving that first sergeant role, and then leaving, but again, Black Rifle, I took time, but I left it, but like, it was now these other ones that I've just left. It's, I know what a good unit looks like, right? So Black Rifle was great. I left because after we went public, again, of personal reasons, like I just saw little things where I was just like, like maybe there's time, right? I mean, so that's fine. The job after that, though, I stayed 67 days because I know what a crappy unit looks like, right? And that I know what I look like when I'm not happy at work. And I know what young Dan looks like probably when he was toxic and mad and would complain. And you're like, nope, like you're just at a point. And so, I mean, if anything, I feel like it's a very me trying to preach to young people. If you can harness that power of some self-awareness and emotional intelligence early on, you'll be way more successful. Yeah. Cause it's taken me 50 some years to finally, I think, have that capacity. Yeah.
Which I mean is still phenomenal because I think that there are people who die and never have that level of
Yeah.
emotional
Right.
awareness, if I'm going to be honest with
Yeah.
you. And so I think
Well, you
that
gotta have good mentors too. Like, I mean, and then when I say mentors, peers, Chachi. So Tim, retired E9 TACP. He works at Black Rifle currently as the senior director for philanthropy. I will call Tim and he's, led me through some times when, um, he gave me some advice like, hey man, like take the moral high ground. Like don't dip down to someone's level because like you can get mad. So yeah. Um, which was just like again last year, right? Went to leave a job after 67 days. Just like, oh my God, can you believe this person said this to me? Right. And so it goes back to, yeah, like don't send that email right away. Don't hit enter as you're angrily one finger typing or text, trying to take the moral high ground a little bit with it. And so it's still learning. Like you're never like, I'm not so self-aware that I'm some guru. Trust me, you learn. But again, I think at this point too, my network. So, and even as I, not that I'm on my soapbox, but even my network, I know my network is strong because I reciprocate it. If someone comes to me, if I can do something, I will try to help. So I just know that like, hey man, if I'm going to quit this job at 67 days, yeah, I don't have anything, but I know I can reach out to X, Y, and Z today. Right. And, not necessarily have something, but have an opportunity, and a lot of people go through that on LinkedIn right now. This guy, Zach just got laid off and he's got like 4 weeks severance. And so he's the one who inspired me to actually start doing some videos, but same thing, like he's out there and, trying to do that network. And, I bet it's going to work.
I think that is all great advice, especially building self-awareness, building the emotional intelligence, and then having mentors. I think that that is such a I mean, having people who have gone before you or peers that can be sounding boards for you, which goes back to that seeking community. I think that those are all great things that people really should benefit from. And
Yeah.
definitely saying like build your emotional intelligence, self awareness is a little bit more touchy hippie. If we were gonna go back to your
Very,
get back
very
to your
monkish. Yeah. Like I'm
yeah
going to be a monk and I couldn't tell you when it happened, right?
yeah
Like where all of a sudden, am I still immature? 100%. And my wife would, right? She would definitely agree. But there's at some point, and I would say maybe like 48, like there was some age, there was some point where it's like, okay, yeah.
yeah,
But I would
which
say
is
like, so
cool.
I'll tell you a quick story about Chachi. We have the time and if you can edit it
No,
out.
we got all the time.
Chachi got appointed over me. I think, again, it was maybe like a little butthurt, blah, 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 right? Long story, but it wasn't anything bad. But we were in a meeting like right after the announcement happened. And I caught myself being a little bit nippy, which
Mm,
I can, right? He and I are the same age, right? We did the same thing in the military, blah, blah, blah. And I stopped because I knew who my audience was. I knew who I was talking to, who I was starting to get a little snippy with. And I excused myself. I said, Chach, let me go outside. Let me go gather it. Right. And then take some time. That right there. Yeah. Some people probably wouldn't have, and they probably would have kept being either argumentative or just
yeah,
passive aggressive to a point of like, hey dude, is everything all right? And like,
yeah.
did someone just kill your dog? Yeah. So but I remember a story like that. So, and that was, that's, that's obviously been a year and a half, but yeah. So
And it's cool
yeah,
because some people might not even view them as the bad person in that scenario. Like they could say, I was deserving of X promotion, I didn't get it. And so then like that person
that's,
is at
yeah,
fault, not
yeah,
me. And
yep.
it's some if you're able to someday hone in on like when you had your moment of enlightenment, I would really love to have you back on the podcast so we could figure it out because
Yeah.
I think
Right.
like again like I don't want to like heap like I mean I am, but it's heap too much praise like and make you feel weird, but it's like it's really cool to have somebody have that level of self-awareness because I don't think that I think it's way rarer than you think it is. And so
Yeah.
it's cool to be able to hear that and to get your advice on the podcast because if people could have that level of self-awareness and that humility, I think it would help a lot of people out. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah. I mean, like it's, social media is the same way. Like I made a post when I was at Black Rifle, years ago. And I made a comment about, I said, hire a master sergeant, not a master's degree. It's got over 200,000 impressions. Like it was, and this is me, not Black Rifle, right? It's
I'm pretty
crazy.
sure I remember seeing
Um,
that when it came out. Like like I remember
and
that.
I only said it to a degree of just because, we put a lot of focus on degrees and I think degrees are great, but I was just saying also like, maybe my master sergeant rank is equal to your master's degree if you don't have experience. Cause there are a lot of people who are like, what if I'm a master with a master's degree? Hell, man, like then you're phenomenal. Like I get that. That's awesome. Which my wife is. So, I mean, it's not like, yeah. So I wasn't trying to be disparaging against, uh, education, but I got some of that hate. That was my first experience. I got some hate. And I tell you, one of the ladies, women was an active duty lieutenant, Air Force. She's one, I have very few people blocked. I probably block a lot of the bots now just 'cause I don't want to see their stuff. So I hit block. She was a real human. I think she was a first lieutenant. Yeah, no, and I blocked her. She was, yeah, it was bad. But it took everything. Like that's where too, even where, your emotional intelligence, cause you could, cause my wife's not really big for the social media. She's like, why are you even entertained? Why are you even entertaining them? And you're like, because I want them to understand and not judge me, but you're never gonna,
No. You're not.
like, I'm not gonna change your mind via social media, via me trying to, text
Yeah.
or,
Yeah,
get a comment. Yeah.
mine's rarely change within the comment sections of social media.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. So, Black Rifle, they had, their PR stuff. And I talked to two people via the phone, which, I worked for the VP of marketing whenever it put me over to marketing. And, Molly's like, just be very careful. And I knew, and I was like, yeah, if they start cussing at me and I won't say anything, but because there was stuff with Evan, right. And Black Rifle and politics that happened. And I was defending and I was like, and so I would DM them and I would say, hey, you want to call me? Here's my personal cell phone number. Let's have a discussion. And I had two 30-minute discussions with two different people, over it. And I think I changed their mind, but it wasn't about even changing their mind. It was just like, hey, here's accurate information. Do with that now as you please.
Yeah. And I also
Yep.
think it's way harder for people to be like, the closer you get to human, like face to face interaction, the way harder it is to be mad at people. Like,
Yeah.
it's so easy to just blast somebody in a comment thread on fill in the blank social media. Cause like, there's no
Yep.
consequence to that. When you're on the phone, then you have to contend with someone's argument live. And then
Or,
if you're face to face, no one says
oh,
anything because no one is
yep.
confrontational in this world.
Yeah. Right.
They
Yeah.
think they are until they have to say it to someone's face. But
Yeah.
it's no, it's cool that you did that because you're opening yourself up to like a lot of hate, which is a unfounded because they hate this concept, not you, but they're gonna come dump it all at your feet.
Yeah.
So no, it's a
No,
lot.
I'd say
That's
both gentlemen were fine and great to talk to. They listened, but again, but their comments on social media were a little bit, I don't know, harsh or judgmental to a point where I was like, you know what? Like, I have enough faith again that these conversations, like, you're just not going to scream at me and it'll be a dialogue. And it was. So, I mean, maybe I got lucky.
maybe, or maybe you're just really good at communicating. We'll go with that
Oh,
one.
50-50.
Yeah. So the last question that I really want to dive into
Yeah, Bill.
is you've got a lot of skill in terms of interacting with people on the social networks, getting engagement. You've also said that people who are getting out really benefit from that networking, building that community. Um, I don't want to take too much of like your juice, but what would you for someone listening who's never heard of LinkedIn or they've never like they're very basic in terms of building a presence for themselves to find a job in their transition, what would your recommendations be to that person to start diving into this world to begin networking and building that brand so they can find a job?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is just, building the profile. And again, if they just Googled how to build a LinkedIn profile, like you're gonna get there. And it's like any social media, like get a picture, right? I mean, even if it were right here, if I snapshotted this, like this is like do that, right? Like this is a good start. Um, and then the headline. So you do that, but you're like, okay, so just because I have a profile. So again, just what does a profile mean? Have it really be you though too. So that photo, like if I snap this, like this is me now, right? Today. Don't take a photo from, you don't want to see, 1984 Dan, right? Like 1984 Dan doesn't look like this. So people want to see that, right? But once you have that though, now it's like, how are you engaging? What do you want to see in your feed? And then how do you now put yourself out there? So that's what I tell you. What I'm going to say is, like, I'm in my office. I look around at things that you believe in or you use daily. Right. Yeah. So I use iPhones. So let me file Apple, right? My MacBook, right? I use a MacBook. Let me file Apple. But you're like, okay, but I'm not a tech or nerdy guy, so I don't really want to follow that. You're like, but there's so many other things. Like, I look around my office. I run. So there's like any running brands, Nike, On, right? Whatever you want, Saucony, my archery stuff, my shooting stuff. Like there's so much. So, and you follow those and then even like a LinkedIn, then you start hitting connect with people because you're going to find someone in that company. Again, because we are military, right? Which I'm not post-military. Someone has probably been in the service. I I usually accept everyone's request if I have some kind of connection with them, right? And or if I look at their profile and I see that they're active or did something. Um, it's really like and I'm not making fun of any countries. I mean, there's Pakistan, India, Afghanistan ones that you get, and you're like, okay, like China, like you're like, you're fake. So you don't accept them. Um, and so you start making these, and then you'll start seeing stuff, and then you're gonna start seeing. So like it's like me. So say you started following me, and I'll talk about random stuff. Right? I'm not on there to promote, my business or anything. Now, again, if I'm working for a company, I might show my brand. Like, so when I was at Black Rifle, right, I showed a lot of coffee, but I talked about other things. So even now, like I'm doing videos talking about Chat GPT. I don't work for Chat GPT. I have zero in that, right? And I know there's a ton of either other AI sites, Jasper, Copy.ai, right? I know. So I'll throw them out there. I just happen to be using Chat GPT. So I'm throwing that out. So you might see my content and then again, it's that sea of information. And so now you engage. Well, I'm one that since I like that platform, I'm going to engage back with you. And that's where, when I talk about brands, that's what brands need to be doing. And if you have a good social media manager, which, Black Rifle always did, is you could get a comment back. And dude, how cool is it that Black Rifle just said something back to me, right? Again, I know what but Dan Horgan just said something back to me, like, so and you get engagement and you like that. And so then you start seeing that, Instagram's the same way. I up for like the longest time, probably never would comment on anything. I would either put some content out and if I didn't know the people, but now I see the power of that. Whether it's a thumbs up or something, commenting on other brands and stuff that, I use and believe in. So you have that profile, you start getting into there, start making comments and connecting with people. At that point, now you have made that network, right? Um, and I don't know. I mean, I like, so I think you made that, and I don't know. I guess it just sounds like I'm stumped because for me, like, it's so like once that is boulder or that avalanche that's rolling, like it's rolling and it doesn't stop unless you just jump off the platform, right? You can be like, hey, I'm taking a break or I don't want to use it anymore. Bye. But at that point, you might have made actually like real friends in real life, right? Not just, via that. And you probably have their cell phone number or something.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
completely agree with what you're saying. I think for me, watching it happen when I was on LinkedIn, from making the profile, following different cybersecurity companies that I was interested finding kind of the people who were in the space that I wanted to be in, interacting with them, reaching out to veterans to get a better idea of the space.
Yep.
All of that happened on LinkedIn, and it was very, very powerful. And I think that all of your recommendations are so crucial to folks because these social media platforms really do allow you to expand your search scope, like globally, in terms of
Yeah.
figuring out what you want to do next with your life after you're getting out of the military. And if you play in the space and you take enough time, you can find a lot of valuable stuff out there
Well,
in
yeah.
that ocean of information that you're talking about.
And it's just even like you never use something even by itself. So again, if you're just using LinkedIn just to find a job, I would say you're doing it wrong. I mean, I would tell you even my job search, Indeed and LinkedIn are my two. Like I pair them up together, right? Um, and then even IG, right? So I like Instagram over Facebook. Obviously, I say obviously I like Instagram over Facebook, but if I'm looking at a company, right? My first thing is LinkedIn. They don't have a LinkedIn presence. You're like, okay, I can understand it. But then I'll go to Instagram. And if a company that I like, if I want to work for, and it's companies I'm looking for, they don't even have an Instagram. Now you're just like,
What are we doing?
yeah, like what are we doing? I mean, because yeah, it's crazy. But Indeed can be the same way. You can be on Indeed, and you're looking and you might see a company. You're like, I don't know that name, and so don't discredit because you don't know that company, right? People talk about that all the time. Like you have large, excuse me, like, hey, I want to work at Nike, or like, okay, there's Nike, but what about this new startup, tennis shoe brand, right? Great. You found it on Indeed. You've never heard of them. Go to LinkedIn, see if they have a LinkedIn account, right? Because I bet they probably, if they're a startup, I bet they do probably have a LinkedIn, right? Nowadays, about that funding. And then
Got to
same thing
make
with
that
their
money.
IG, if they're a startup. Yeah. And so now you've never heard of that name. You want to apply for the job that you saw on Indeed, but now you're going to touch base with them on all these other channels.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
I I never, when you go back to talk about like things that people didn't use in their transition, I never even looked at Indeed, which is really funny. So great advice. I should have listened to this podcast 2 years ago.
I said, well,
uh,
I don't, I'm not quitting or leaving jobs, so I can just be more experienced in the process by any means. But I would tell you, like, when I left that, job after Black Rifle, and I was only there 67 days. I went 7 weeks, unemployed, air quotes, which isn't too long. I think the average is maybe like 8. So I hit a little bit just below like the average of what, it would be. But trust me, it's stressful. I get it. Cause there's people where it's months,
yeah,
3, 4, 5,
yeah,
6. And you're just like, I
it's
don't know
tough.
what that would feel like. Cause 7 to me, like when I hit at 7 and I landed, that one, I was like, woo, okay. And just now it's, I don't know, I said lucky. Now I just feel like my network knows me so well too. And I think my network knows that I'm not at Black Rifle. A lot of people won't even lead your LinkedIn profile sometimes. They're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, I haven't been there for a year. So
The
you need somebody because I'm available,
Yeah,
what type of
yep,
scenario. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and then someone hears that and they're like, actually, yeah. And you're like, and that's happened. And you're like, great.
I think what you bring up, which I think is really cool, which is important to understand, is like that being under the gun to find a job really sucks. I think that
Yeah.
for people who are getting out of the military, you never want to be in that position. And so if you take the time, like there will be, you might have, for the listeners out there, there might be a time in your life where you get out of the military, you get a job, and you get laid off, and then you're kind of under the gun to find a job. I hope that doesn't happen, but it might.
Yeah.
Don't let the time where you can put in the work when you're getting out of the military also be one of those times, because you can start early and start doing all of this work early if you choose to. So
Yeah.
choose to.
Well, you have to. And again, the programs, and I'm not saying that like it's easy, but like there are like Skill Bridge. God, like there's just stuff that is there, and I was on the Black Rifle side, like I had a Skill Bridge, person come in and she was great. And I think that she was one of our first Skill Bridge, and so you know, it's even a time, and this is where the thing about Skill Bridge, the company doesn't have to hire you, but it also determines if you want to work for that company. And again, being in a spot where I'm at now, where I'm seeing that, I think that's phenomenal. Because if you stay with, say you do was 6 months, right? So say you do the full 6 months and it's great, then you're like, yes, great. I know I want to work here. But like, if you don't want to work there and your 6 months is over, and even if they do offer you, if you don't offer anyway, you're like, no, I'm good. Like you can make that decision. You're like, I'm out. Because
Yeah.
as my wife would tell you, so again, I would tell you some of my stuff too. Like I have a wife that balances me. Is she's just like, you got to be where you want to be, like, both feet in.
Which is
And
good. It's good
yeah,
advice.
yeah,
Dan, it's been great talking to you.
yeah.
I really enjoy getting to know you. It's cool to put a face and a story to all the LinkedIn content, all the Chat GPT content that is coming
Right?
out next Thursday.
God, how long did
Uh,
we go? Like, I feel like, did we go Rogan length? Like, I know, like, I felt like
an
I was just,
hour and 40 minutes, and we're
geez,
almost
God, you
done.
got me just rattling off
Hey,
about,
I would be a bad podcast host if that wasn't the case. Last question before we wrap up. What
sure.
is your final piece of advice that you want to leave to our listeners?
Uh, Final piece of advice that I would leave is probably what I kind of said, and it sparked it, is the emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I would tell you, if you can take any course, because there's courses out there, or if you can get a peer and a mentor that can guide you to increase your emotional intelligence and get a better control on that, do it. do it so much sooner. Cause again, I know I can go back to 35-year-old Dan. And if I would have had a handle on some of my emotional intelligence, some of the decisions I would have, made, right. You never know where you go, but so that'd be my piece. Grab a hold of your emotional intelligence. It's a real thing. I'm not saying don't be emotional, but just like, have control over it. And the better control you have over that, I mean, it's almost like a superpower. That would be my big, 'cause it goes into resiliency. If you have control of that, it helps with resiliency. Like there's so many after effects of having part of that. And the resiliency is right. I mean, that's huge. So, I could sit there and say, hey, be resilient. But I think it goes back to a little bit, if you can really just get that emotional intelligence dialed in, under check at some point, you'll be better off.
I love it. I love it. It's
Yep.
a great piece of advice to end on. Dan, again, thank
Cool.
you so much for coming on, talking about everything, giving your backstory and your advice to all the listeners. I really, really appreciate it. And for everyone out there, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Post Military Podcast. We will catch you on the next one. Peace.